biology. So let me stress right up front, you are allowed to be a fan of both. With that in mind, how many people love Star Wars? How many people love Star Trek? Excellent. How many are just here with science? Outstanding.
And how many thought John Barrowman is going to be here? Am I not one? Am I on?
Pull it closer.
Oh, eat it, right. And how many of you thought John Barrowman was going to be here? You're in for a surprise.
Sorry. Well, this is my colleague, Eric Spana. I'm Mohamed Noor, and we're very happy to bring this to you. This is the first time we've done this panel, so, please forgive any kinks, such as the sound, which seems to be a kink. But anyway, we're very happy to have you here. The format we're going to be using today...
Next.
The format we're going to be using today is we're going to have most of this be open for questions and stuff, but we're going to start with a 2-minute good biology bit from Star Trek, and then a 20-30 second little on Star Wars, a little diss. And then we'll go the other direction, and we'll repeat that for a couple of rounds. Okay? So we'll do maybe about 4 rounds back and forth like that.
Just want to point out, I have never spoken for 2 minutes in my life.
It's okay. Give or take 10.
Yeah, 2 plus or minus 12.
Give or take 10. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions and discussion, and hopefully we'll have whoever wireless. Actually, I guess the wireless mic's being used for. Oh no, we can take it. We won't need the video anymore at that point. Yeah. So we'll pass around a wireless mic for you guys to ask questions to us after that. I will stress, and I'll stress this again at the end. We are not physicists. Please, biology questions. No idea about the transporters.
Aaron's here.
Yep.
Aaron said one right to her. Okay.
Without further ado, let's dive in.
All right. First up.
So again, we're starting with round 1, Star Trek. So Star Trek has, of course, it has many wonderful qualities, but one of the things it does, which a lot of science fiction doesn't do, is good consideration of non-carbon-based life. So what do we mean? People hear this sort of carbon-based life all the time. What does this mean? What I'm showing up here, the top part of that is a just random carbohydrate. I mean, I guess you guys are familiar with carbohydrates, sugars, things like that. The bottom one is sort of a representation of a random protein. And it's showing the elements that are in it. So you see that long carbon chain, that CCCCC, in both the carbohydrate and with a couple of interruptions, but you see that same thing in the protein. That's true also in fats, that's true in your DNA, that's true in your RNA. So everything that we use all the time has a lot of these long carbon backbones, as we call it. Click twice, please. Now, if hypothetically we were to replace carbon with something else, we would want something that could also bind to 4 elements at a time, just like that did. So we go to the periodic table of elements. I guess there's no pointer. Oh, oops. Oh. Oh, yes, we can do it. Fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Oops. We still need you. So if you were to go down, basically the column in the periodic table of elements indicates the number of atoms it can bind to. So if you go down from carbon just by 1, the next logical one is silicon. Ooh. And actually Star Trek is really good about representing multiple, not just one, but multiple silicon-based life forms. We have the Horta here from the original series. We have the crystalline entity from Next Generation, the microbrain also from Next Generation, Excalbion, which may or may not be silicon, but it's something that looks like that. So this is logical. This makes sense that this would be another potential way that you could actually get life form out there. Now there's a problem, but Star Trek also identified the problem to it. I'm going to play a little clip here.
Silicon-based life is physiologically impossible, especially in an oxygen atmosphere.
So McCoy says silicon-based life is physiologically impossible in an oxygen-based atmosphere. That is actually correct. The reason for that is carbon is very good at binding to other carbons. Silicon actually would much be happier binding to an oxygen or a hydrogen. So if you were to put, say, some silicon-based thing in water, it will turn into sand. Not very good for life. Right? So this is actually very, very, very thoughtful about the science behind the biochemistry of life. Meanwhile, Star Wars is showing us like sock puppets chasing spaceships. What on earth does that thing actually eat in the wild? What is it made of? I will leave that alone and pass the baton.
Well, actually, have we read the Wikipedia article on this creature? Have we? What's it made of? It was a silicon-based life form. All right, so yeah, that's cute. Suck. It's a space slug. What's the matter with you? All right, so here we go. We get fun things like, you know, actual living planets, not episodic things. So, you know, we can actually do a little ecology. So, hey, look, here's Tatooine. It's got its nice 2 suns, and it generates actual plants. Now, maybe not in the digital era anymore, but the originals had plants. They did, right? It's really kind of sad when you look at the frames and go, man, it was really quite green. And then they scrubbed it out. So we've got these nice plants. Oh, there's one. Shrubbery. All right, so that's not enough to put oxygen in the atmosphere, but it's shrubbery. Shut up. Now we got things that eat those. We get little carnivores. Oh, it's dark. Yeah. Those things have names and huge backstories. Those carnivores die and rot.
That malfunctioning little twerp. This is all his fault.
Yeah, so you can make dragon gets turned to bones, picked clean. So it's the circle of life. It's awesome. We could sing. We have microphones. And instead, you know, we get things. Oh, those go back to producing. And in Star Trek, then we get hybrids. Where I went to your talk today, and as I recall, we were more closely related to grass than Vulcans. And so, yeah, half things is a tough one. All right, yeah, all right, sorry.
Thank you for that. As a matter of fact, there was a little bit more to the talk than that one model. There was an alternative theory that was actually introduced in the original series of Star Trek. Right? So, yes, there's a lot of alien interbreeding, and we have our Trek director here interbreeding with an alien species. we have lots of things, not from them, but lots of hybrids being produced indeed. Which time, yeah, that'd be the alternate Kelvin. Anyway, but in the original series, they actually had an episode. This is called the Paradise Syndrome. It was a little bit weird that they went to this planet and, oh, look, there's Native Americans all over the place. Okay, that's a little weird. But the explanation given in that episode could actually explain why there are so many humanoid species. What they suggest in there is that there was a super race called the Preservers that came to Earth and took humans from there and seeded them on other planets. So if this happened like much earlier, of course, than Native Americans, but say, you know, a couple of 100,000 years ago, maybe with Homo erectus, some of our ancient hominid ancestors, those potentially could have evolved into, over time, Vulcans and Cardassians and all these races that we really like. And you may think, oh yeah, right, would we be interbreeding with things that evolved a couple 100,000 years ago? Well, the answer to that is absolutely yes, because humans, in fact, did interbreed with other species here on Earth just in the past 100,000 years. All of you here in this room have some Neanderthal ancestry because humans and Neanderthal interbred just within the past 100,000 years here on Earth. If you're from the Pacific Islands, you probably have another ancient hominid ancestor called Denisovan that also interbred with humans. So in fact, Star Trek actually did pretty good with that, because it not only did it have the interbreeding, but it had an explanation that actually does make sense. Meanwhile, now you were talking about ecology and stuff like that. There was an interesting little incident in. There's an interesting little incident here on in Empire Strikes Back. So we have Luke is like, you know, he's been hurt, he's collapsed, he's really cold. Han Solo comes out there with his tauntaun. Tauntaun dies, he like pulls out the lightsaber, slices it open, sticks Luke in there. Okay. So the temperature on Hoth is probably on the order of like minus 60 Celsius. It's pretty darn cold. Yet somehow this is supposed to keep Luke warm enough like through the night into the morning. So either the tauntaun started at like body temperature like us, at which point it would cool down within an hour, and Luke would have just frozen to death, right? Or it started at like over 100 degrees Celsius and it boiled Luke. So you can have a Luke casserole the next morning. Other issues are here. What's that? Haggis, there you go. Other issues too, like there should have been an ice mask around his face, assuming he was still breathing. So there's a couple of little things there that still need to be addressed.
Yeah.
Back to you?
Yeah. But it was funny. Yeah. So, yeah, what I remember from Star Trek, aside from the incredible variation of nose bridges and foreheads, ears, was not a lot of biological diversity.
You will bring Captain Solo and the Wookiee to me.
They got legit orcs. You can't beat legit orcs, right? So in there, I mean, there's all kinds of deviations from Earth biology on there. There's like a cephalopod dude in the background. You're just sentenced to die by a giant vertebrate slug. And orcs, and that other guy who I can't remember. But also, no, yeah. Oh, yeah. Gotta love a good Muppet. I don't, actually. But amazingly, no foreheads and noses and ears. Yeah, budget. All right, so we got, we've got, you know, interesting things with real lives and backstories, and the beauty of having not that many episodes is you have less writers to screw things up. Man, those amino acids into lactose. Oh, they get, yeah, that was just the list that Mohamed was kind enough to provide me. So it makes me think, those are the okay ones. Because he was totally hiding the bad ones. All right, there we go.
Thank you for that. All right, so I'm going to come back to the first point about biological diversity a little bit later on, but let's talk about genetics here for a minute in terms of how great Star Trek is. So I'm going to play a little clip here. This is from Deep Space Nine, just as one example of the use of genetic testing in Star Trek.
Oh, here we are.
Which one's this?
That's a new one from the infirmary, and this is the life form from the planet. But remember, it went through several metamorphoses.
It's not the same entity. The nucleotide sequences are entirely different.
They just did a forensic DNA analysis exactly the way we would do it today here on Earth. That's pretty darn good. Oops, sorry.
Oh, here we are.
There, stop it. Thank you. But in general, Star Trek does a lot of stuff that we would do genetically here in real life. They've done things looking for disease predisposition. There were episodes of Next Generation where they actually were able to identify this person has a genetic disease using exactly the same approach we would do today. There was lots of parentage analysis and relative analysis. You know, Luke just waited for Darth to tell him, hey, I'm your father. There's lots of...
His father died at the Clone Wars.
Yeah, sort of. Genetically, no. There's lots of determining species of descent or region of descent, and again, this forensic stuff. This was all done in Star Trek, and it was all done really well. I'm not even clear if Star Wars people have genes. So, speaking of which, speaking of genetics here, this was one kindly provided to me by Eric, actually, so there's some daddy issues here. I'll read it because I know the print's a little bit small. The top part says, "The force is unusually strong within him. That much is clear. Who was his father?" And Mom says, "There was no father." So, how did he get a Y chromosome to become male? How is he not a clone of his mother? There's many, many questions out there, many, many daddy issues there.
There's so many terrible answers for that.
Yeah. But we'll let you give us a good one, though. Trade seats.
Should I actually answer that? You know? Good. Because you know, in reality, the answer is like probably no. Like, she has no recollection of anything happening. So, you know, there actually is some okay genetics because you pass on some traits. Inheritance works just fine, and you can put together a decent pedigree from the Skywalker family. You just don't know who that square is at the top. I'm waiting for some good prequel, sequel that Lucas doesn't write.
Star Wars 2.5.
That could, yeah. I'm waiting for the Rogue One version of that explanation. But yeah, like that pedigree works just fine for transmission of force usage, which I have a whole, I could talk about that for a long time. And so that works just fine. Like there's just nothing really problematic about that at all. Hoping I don't have to worry about spoilers. It's been so long now. And so the good thing about yours is that you've got huge amounts of like ability to put in positives and also negatives. But then there's the number of evil and different timelines. Is that your, yeah, right there. You're wearing one, right? And in one of them that, yeah. So turns out what really, really big things that eat meat need is meat. There are not enough Starship officers on that planet to feed that giant monster thing, or the other giant monster thing. Or the other giant monster thing, or was there just two? There were three. That's kind of fun. They were everywhere, despite the lack of plants, small animals, herbivores, other things. They went straight to the yellow bar boss monsters. But that might be a thing that Star Trek people don't talk about, like that. Is that okay to talk about those movies?
No.
Right. That's like talking about a cursed child play. Right? Everybody angers about that. All right, here you go.
All right, this is our last round, and we're going to open the floor for questions. So coming back, there was a point that came up earlier about the diversity of life. Now, all life, and you guys who saw my talk earlier today saw this one point, but that's not my punchline. All life on Earth came from a single origin, and it was about 3.8 billion years ago. And this was actually depicted perfectly in episode of From Next Generation, All Good Things. That's actually not my point from it, though. Since all the life came from one single origin, and it's all related, we're expecting there should be more diversity off of Earth than on Earth, right? Just because basically if you imagine like diversity within a family versus diversity among families, you expect different families to have more diversity. So what you actually see on both on Earth and in Star Trek. So here, this is looking just at tolerance, just as one example. This bacteria right here, this is Pyrococcus. It actually grows optimally at 100 degrees Celsius. So if you boil water, it's like, woohoo, I'm happy. This you guys are probably familiar with. This is a tardigrade. This is a water bear. You can freeze them down to like minus 200 centigrade, and they're fine. They're not happy, but they're fine. They can live through that. So that's sort of pretty much the range you see on life on Earth. Now, here are ones from Star Trek. Well, there's a lot of spacefaring species, and note they're not humanoid, but
Or slugs.
what's that?
Or slugs.
Or slugs, exactly. So this shows, again, greater diversity off of Earth than on. And then you have the Tholians up here. They actually need 200 degrees Celsius. So again, we do see tolerances exceeding what we see from life on Earth, as we would expect. And again, go Star Trek. They think hard about the science on these things. Meanwhile, this is the low blow one, I apologize. Roses are red, sand is coarse, the midichlorians are the powerhouse of the Force. And then there's the other part. It's true, it's all of it. The dark side, the Jedi, except midichlorians. That's bull. But I think you have a response to that.
That's such a low blow. But, you know what? It's real. All of it. Because it's been published. I don't know about you guys, but did you guys ever see this story that was, I don't know, a month or two ago? Which was a college professor essentially went through the mitochondria Wikipedia page and used find and replace mitochondria with midichlorian. Wrote a couple of scripts to clean up the text somehow. Wrote an honest materials and methods saying, I just copied this from Wikipedia and changed the words. And sent it to a bunch of journals, which were, let's just do the bunny ears, peer reviewed.
Slightly less reputable.
Yeah, it got accepted. I think it was 5 journals accepted it. 2 of them just asked him for money to publish it then, of course, because they could only publish this online for about $1,000. But 3 of them did it for free. So he got the same paper published in 3 different places, and it went online, and then he told everybody he did it. So that the press got it, and then immediately they disappeared. So I managed to pull this off before they disappeared. And if you can find the PDFs, it's hilarious. Now, on the other hand, I actually got a panel here in the Star Wars track last year. I went on with the Force is more like a virus you catch, and not as much as a gene. And if it was going to be a transmittable agent, you could just give it a name that starts with an M and ends with a chlorine. All right, so maybe one more slide. Aaron, can I use your joke? Aaron, can I use your joke? At Warp 10, we get bad episodes. Did I get that right? Yeah. Warp 10, we turn into slugs or salamanders.
Really our future.
Salamanders. This is our future, people. I guess this is one of those we don't talk about that. No. Yeah. Okay. All right. One more? Yeah. All right. So we got one more slide. So here. Oh, that's a crap. Okay. Here we go. Questions and thoughts from audience. And we are not physicists. How their spaceships work is not our problem.
Hyperdrive.
Sure. You might as well ask me how my car works. Press gas, shift gears. All right, so we're gonna take questions. You should make them easy and fun, because we're being graded on. Are we being graded on this?
I think we are. I think it might be on the test.
Oh. So ask Mohamed hard questions, and not me. All right.
Why do Minox eat spaceships?
Wait, say that again. Why do Minox eat spaceships? Oh, man, the nutritional content of spaceships is actually quite high, I think. Darn. Okay. Man, I probably could actually come up with some crap idea of like, well, you know, they rust and you gotta eat the rust off of the things that are rusting and they're iron deficient and something. But wait, but wasn't it cables? Weren't they eating cables?
They must have been.
They were strangely attracted to cables.
So there must have been pressure there inside there, right? Because it's not like they were all wearing full spacesuits. If I remember correctly, they were just wearing like a mask, right? So there must have been pressure.
You should just ask how they were flapping wings and what was happening there.
Yeah.
How they were generating lift was a way better idea. Way better question. Yeah.
Okay, since you guys aren't physicists, I'm just going to say both universes involve ships, people going very fast. Can you discuss how they address the biological side of going very fast?
Oh, that's easy. They don't.
Yeah. If you,
Planet going very fast around all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, there was one episode, so it's credit to Aaron too for identifying this as a really good episode. There's one episode of Star Trek Voyager where like time is going faster there on the planet than it is outside the planet. So like while they're in orbit for just a couple of days, basically the species goes from like cavemen to like much more advanced than the Voyager people. So I mean, every now and then that kind of thing comes up, but generally speaking, with respect to the travel of the people there, you don't have like them going off in warp 10 and coming back and their twin brothers being twice as old as they are. They don't touch that at all. Certainly not in Star Wars. Either.
No.
Yeah.
I don't.
Thank you, though.
What would you consider the least plausible alien species from your biology or from the other show?
That's a very good question.
Oh, what's the worst thing? At least, yeah, because I can't get out of my head now, but like, the big giant space slug is bad enough. Then it has parasites that live elsewhere because Solo recognized them, which meant this giant slug caught something.
I mean, there's also like, there's just some stuff which just doesn't even make sense because the premises on it are so hard. Like species 8472 lives in, what was it, fluidic space? I don't know, is that a thing? I don't think that's a thing. Like, there's a couple of just bizarre things like that come up. Yeah. Thank you, though.
Who would you explain to be thermophiles and ectophiles? Like the ones who can adapt to extreme conditions versus the one that can only adapt with homeostasis?
Can you do that again?
Oh yeah,
Can you repeat that?
I caught most of it. Can you repeat it just so I make sure we got it all? Okay. Do it really close to the microphone, like eat the
I'm
microphone.
sorry. So basically what I'm trying to ask is, the species that are adaptable to extreme conditions versus the species that are adaptable with homeostasis, like within normal conditions.
So when we say extreme conditions, do you mean extreme range of conditions or just one extreme condition?
Like, that's what I mean, like one extreme cold or extreme hot.
Yeah. I see. I mean, we see that on Earth today. So like the example of the bacteria that I showed earlier, the Pyrococcus, it's actually, I think it's an archaean.
It's an archaean. It grows at 105 Celsius.
Yeah, so it's an archaean. But I mean, we have those on Earth today where like it's not at all happy at, say, for example, in a cold temperature. We see those on Earth as well. It's not an uncommon thing. What's a little bit tougher would be to explain something that would be good at a very broad range of conditions.
Yeah.
That would be extremely difficult. I guess the water bears are really good in that regard. Because minus 200 all the way up to like room temp. That's pretty broad. But they're not happy at the lower temperatures. There's a difference between tolerance and preference, right? So there's a lot of species which can tolerate really extremes, but not ones which are happy and can reproduce at the same rate at a very broad range of species. But luckily for both of us, neither fandom seems to portray a very broad range of conditions that they're exploring. We often joke sometimes that part of the reason that you see so many humanoids is because they're only going to planets that have oxygen and stuff. Yeah.
Hey, for Star Trek,
beyond, real life explanations of limited budget, one of the reasons you see mostly humanoids is because they are all interacting with spaceships and starships and instrumentation, and so they all have to have, hands with opposable thumbs and all that good stuff, and eyes that can see our visual spectrum, and ears that can hear the same sorts of sounds we hear, and all that good stuff. In Star Wars, you have a really lot of cool-looking, impossible creatures that couldn't exist in the same room with each other. I mean, I was just at the Mos Eisley Cantina panel last night, and the guy's like, I designed this cool alien with lobster claws. I'm like, okay, lobster claws look really cool, but how are you going to drive a spaceship to operate knobs and dials with lobster claws?
I 100% agree, and I have not quite figured out why huts are powerful. When they don't move very fast, and you have projectile weapons. Just shoot it. But I agree, right? And you see it's a pretty common thing in science fiction. But what I don't think I've ever seen done well, but you guys can holler, which is an appropriate vehicle for a lobster claw guy. Right? Because we envision what it's going to look like based on our ability to grasp things. But, when you're under a different constraint, they just look different, right? Cars without pedals work just fine for mobility fields, right? And so it could happen.
Maybe uses his face.
You just, I'm not sure if lobster claws or slimy tentacles or something. I mean, you have to be able to build those cars in the first place and pick up a stick and use it to bash or something, so.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they dominated another species and forced them to make them for them.
Oh. Why do you think like that?
So as an engineer, one of the things that excites me is the melding of human and machine. You have cybernetics, both Star Trek and Star Wars. I wanted to ask, who does it better, but I want a clever way to ask. So here's really the question. If you forget about the Force, who wins in a fight? Locutus of Borg or Darth Vader?
I definitely think Locutus.
You're not going to like the answer. Which one's Locutus? Was that the one from Next Gen?
So what does Darth Vader have? Darth Vader's
Darth Vader is basically a Borg, right?
Yeah, well, but Darth Vader, there's a distinction there because Locutus is an enhanced human. Darth Vader is a crippled human that is being brought back to reasonableness. So it's not really a fair comparison in that sense.
Who handles cybernetics better, Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, it didn't seem much different though, did it? It was just an amp up the ability.
Yeah, there is
and actually, I would actually say probably Star Trek though, because there was nothing about the biomechanics stuff in Star Wars that made it better than the original.
Exactly.
Right?
Not enhanced. There's not, as they said, it's more machine than man. To quote the.
Here's a cyber. Was there any biological component?
Yeah, no, heart. No, he had a human heart. Oh yeah, no, I remember that.
Hi, thanks for being here. You guys are great.
Hey, thank you.
So,
like your costume too.
Also, we seriously can't believe you all came to this. Right? It kind of burns my heart and frightens me for humanity. But,
so just focusing on Star Wars, Yoda is really old. How can a species, a sentient species that evolved to that point, both from if you go into telomere length, I'd love that, but also gray matter. If you could go into either of those or both, I would love that. But how does a species evolve to be as old as Yoda is in the original series, but still functioning at a normal level?
Without invoking magic. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Assuming that he does not use the Force to stand up.
Yeah. So, lifespan varies a lot based on, lots of things. Metabolism and cellular turnover and telomere, and like just cellular length.
Use another species. Telomeres may be completely different.
Right. So they could actually end chromosomes, or just make them circular and skip that whole part.
Oh. Yeah.
Oh.
Right. And then once you amp up DNA replicate or the accuracy of DNA replication, you stop making mutations and you stop making accidental cancers and things like that. You can live quite a long time. But actually, the brain parts, the first thing I thought of when you said that was, you've got a finite number of neurons in there to remember and record things. And so, does he really have that recollection of all those past events? Or does he still just remember just a wee bit of being a child and those major life events, like when he totally should have killed the emperor?
This is why he lost the ability to talk forward.
So now I just kind of going, what does Yoda's frontal cortex look like?
That's great.
I love that.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
Again, this is an amazing panel. I snuck out from the Mass Effect 10th anniversary party to be here, and I'm glad I did.
I have to go.
They did ask me to come back with you. So Eric, 2 questions, pick your favorite. The biology and the genetics of Lyra Urso being slightly force sensitive versus Jin being not force sensitive, or explain what the bleep is going on with Borgullet reading thoughts.
Wait, go back to the second one. What's the second one?
Borgullet is Saw Gerrera's tentacle monster who can read thoughts.
Oh, the tentacle monster. I kind of dig the idea of the tentacle monster just as a, biological fMRI. Right? Because you can kind of see with some imaging things, of when neurons fire. And if you've got the math worked out for how stuff works, that's fun. Okay, now that gives me a good reason to go back and watch Rogue One. Because look, I don't know about you, but I don't look at my day and go, I think I'd like to cry. Right? There's just no way to not get to the end of that without going, I thought they were gonna live. I'm an idiot.
Mohamed, I think you said early on that a silicon-based life form would have a challenge surviving in an oxygen-rich environment, or at least you
That's what
that.
McCoy said. That's correct. Yes.
Right. Okay. And Eric, you said that the giant worm monster in Star Wars would be fine. Probably because I'm sorry, space monster, right?
Yeah.
That it's fine because it's in space, but that it's silicon-based. And so I want to know, how is it possible then that it would have a mouth that is full of oxygen so that humans can breathe it?
Wait, I thought they had masks on.
Yeah, there was definitely, so that's a good point. There was a pressure, so there was clearly some atmosphere in there, but it's unclear that it was specifically oxygen.
Enough oxygen.
Yeah. Well, actually, was it? I can't remember.
Oxygen is being used as a digestant.
Oh, interesting.
I'm gonna go.
Good answer from the audience. I couldn't pronounce the specifics of that, man.
As a bad professor who gives talks here, I just want to say, man, wikis are amazing. Right?
Go Memory Alpha.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it. Wikipedia. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I used to hate the midichlorians as much as anybody, but think about it, like, we're all scientists. Just because we understand how our bodies work doesn't make them any less magical. Now we understand how the Force works, it's still magical, right? Here's my question. Do you think the midichlorians provide a plausible explanation as to Anakin's missing Y chromosome? Here's the thing. Mitochondria have their own DNA. Why would midichlorians have their own DNA? The only thing the tiny Y chromosome does is make testosterone at a key point in embryonic development. Maybe one of her midichlorians, Shmi's midichlorians, mutates, makes testosterone, boom, you have a male baby.
So maybe a male determining factor got put onto a mitochondrial midichlorian Ooh, that's intriguing. Of course,
I just like that.
There is one problem with that. That if that were true, oh wait, no, actually, no, it is okay. Actually, how does if it's mitochondrial though? How does Darth Vader pass it on to Luke?
Yeah, there's just
because mitochondrial paternally inherited. I don't think Padme had midichlorians.
No, not according to Hasbro.
Yeah, according to Hasbro. Okay, so now we're saying not mitochondria.
So
that makes sense. But then
for his parentage, I've always just chalked it up with, some very bad person came by. Hopefully, that will be revealed in the next movie, and saw the future and went, I'm gonna have to fertilize her. It was.
Who's just lying? That would be simple.
Three other guys.
Is Snoke the bad guy now? Yeah, it was him.
Hi.
Nice shirt.
So, I've heard a lot of criticism of both of these series that a lot of aliens are 6 foot tall bipeds with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. People say, oh, that's so unlikely. But I wonder if what we're seeing here might actually be some kind of convergent evolution, that there might be some reason that having 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head could be associated with gaining sentience. I wonder what you thought about that.
Good question. You want to start first?
I have the silly answer, but why don't you go? Because you'll actually probably say something intelligent.
I don't know about that. It is almost 8 o'clock on the day of DragonCon. No, I don't know why that would have to be true. So at first, there's a couple of things. First, there's the likelihood of even getting something that is that height and biped and stuff like that. There's just the probability aspect of even getting that. But there's no obvious reason why that would be necessary for sentience. At least to me, there's no obvious reason why that would be necessary for sentience. And even actually using, this is an example I just used in my earlier talk, in the most recent Star Trek movie, which I know is in the J.J. Abrams Trek, but please, there were some little tiny things that were sentient and talked, and they were fine. So, I mean, there's no obvious reason within either Star Trek or in general biology why that would be the only reason you could be sentient. And when you look at what are the most intelligent other species that are not particularly closely related to us here on Earth, I mean, you start coming up with like squids and porpoise. I mean, you're not coming up with things that are particularly similar to us.
Yeah, like I was gonna go with crows, but okay.
Yeah, crows works too. They use tools.
Yeah, like if you would just constrain it to things that can build, because I think that building might be one of those requirements.
That's definitely a requirement, yeah.
Right? It requires building to get off the planet.
Yeah.
And if you can build things, you can change, right? And then,
It's a good question. It's a good question.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a good one. I appreciate that. Thank you.
My brain is so full of stuff.
Hey, so I get that in Star Wars, it's a galaxy long ago, far, far away, but would the Hardy-Weinberg formula not still apply to this sort of thing? Like, what times what, got you to equal something like Yoda? Like, what mix of, specimens equaled a creature who could, talk backwards and read the Force and still look like that when nothing else around him ever looked like that ever?
I'm super okay with everything looking different, right? Because if you've got faster than light travel in a populated universe, nothing should look the same, right? Because everything should happen differently, right? And that there's not a second one is weird, but you find lots of one-offs when you just find rules. There's a second Yoda?
Yeah. She's on the council in
There's
episode 1. Yeah.
Oh, no wonder.
Okay. Don't make me rewatch that. There's pod racing.
It's either that or Rogue One.
I'll watch Rogue One.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's an easy
I would
choice.
much rather cry because of Rogue One than cry.
Jar Jar.
Yes, sir.
From your many years of research into alien biology, if there was this Rhodian and I wanted to slow down his reflexes, but he wouldn't accept a drink from me, what are my options?
I didn't catch the beginning part. He said it again.
A Rhodian, I want to slow down his reflexes, but he won't accept a drink from me, so what are my options?
Oh, Greedo's a Rhodian.
Gotcha. Sorry, I didn't know what that race was.
Wait. So you didn't need to turn down his reflexes.
If I need an edge, you know.
Oh, but you can just use your charming smile. Yeah, everything will be fine.
The audience helped me. Thank you.
That. Or you know, a good drink. That milk stuff on Tatooine, you know.
Ether.
Chloroform.
I have two comments.
The mic. Yeah.
Okay. Hello. Okay.
Yeah.
So the first one. So the nice thing about Star Wars is that it's sort of like hand-wavy, and the unfortunate thing about Star Trek is it's very precise at times.
Makes you have more to criticize.
Yeah. So what I was going to say, number one, about Y chromosomes in the Star Wars universe, they're in a galaxy far, far away. You don't actually ever establish that they're Homo sapiens. So sexual traits can be on whatever.
Right.
And then the thing I was going to say about Star Trek and humanoids is there is actually an episode, which I found on Wikipedia, unfortunately, where you guys are talking, that claims that 2 different quadrants were seeded by species that wanted everyone to be humanoids. So everyone has supposedly traits, but they're not actually, they can't be humans by your argumentation if you buy that.
That episode doesn't work. I'll leave it at whatever. What was the first part?
I don't remember the first part. Does anybody remember the first part?
That's a comment. It was a comment.
Right, I got it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so,
good call. Thank you for that.
Thing I learned here at DragonCon this year was that, people who actually make this distinction, which isn't me, really count Star Trek as more science fiction, and Star Wars is more fantasy. Because it just doesn't actually solve things with science or technology.
Have you all seen, we were actually going to play this, but because of the video problems we couldn't play it. I don't know if you guys have seen the College Humor video about Star Wars versus Star Trek. If you haven't seen it, pull it up after you leave here. It's on YouTube. It's very easy to find, but it is hilarious. You can play it from here, but the audio's too bad.
Oh, that's true. The audio's terrible.
Yeah. Sorry about it.
Hi. So there's this episode of DS9 where one of the crew members comes from a planet with really low pressure.
Yep.
And so she has to use that wheelchair.
Yep.
So
So
we
like
know
the
that on
shooting.
Earth, like pressure changes physiology. Why, after thousands of millions of years of genetic drift, if she's humanoid, would she be recognizably humanoid on a planet with so little pressure?
Probably wouldn't be. Probably wouldn't be.
So what would she look like?
Now, it depends on how long this actually was happening. Now, I mean, we're assuming, of course, that I don't know if they actually went in the episode about like how long they've been distinct like that. Maybe some catastrophe happened. But you know, if you imagine people from Earth staying in space for a very long time, they lose a lot of bone mass. That's actually really bad when you come back to Earth. So that's just one example.
Like on the Expanse.
Yeah, like on the Expanse, yeah. So that kind of thing happens pretty quickly. So it's possible that something that didn't happen crazy long ago. And again, if we go back with the theory from that one episode of Star Trek I was talking about with the Native Americans, maybe it wasn't actually that long ago that they went to that planet.
Yeah,
So
like why would she even need feet?
Yeah, basically there may not have been enough evolutionary time for her to actually lose it. That would be the one explanation I toss out there.
I like that.
Yeah.
Different time frames, yeah.
Thanks.
Two-part question.
Please.
I saw the episode of Phantom Menace when they were in the sub, they're being chased by sort of aquatic reptilian animal that was pretty huge, and then another larger animal appeared.
Oh, right. There's always bigger fish in the sea. And I can't believe I just watched that.
Yeah. I was wondering, on a world that's a completely water planet, say, well, 7 times the size of Earth, would there be any limitation of the size of the animals being developed that large or large?
Oh, so would there be a limitation to the size of the animals, the size of organism, really, on a fully aquatic planet? And boy, that's a We ask the animal physiology questions, darn it.
Well, think about like what's on Earth. Right?
Yeah.
What's the biggest animal on Earth?
Yeah, but we got whales now. Is that blue?
Yeah.
Blue, right? But that's still actually, I think, the largest thing that ever
Largest animal today. I don't know about ever.
Largest animal.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yes, I know you're acre big fungus, I know. To me, it's are there ecological constraints that would allow a thing to get bigger?
Right.
And what's the temperature, pressure? I don't know, but I would bet there's math that you could do to figure it out.
There's a relationship
right?
on that about
like,
size.
But most of the stuff I think about has always been, in air at 1g gravity. And if you throw those two things out, I have no idea.
The second part of the question is, on a world like that, would there be any sentient beings develop in a world like that? I mean, without landmass.
There's no a priori. So the question was, would a sentient being evolve on a planet like that? I don't think there's any a priori reason why you would assume that wouldn't or couldn't happen. So. It doesn't particularly impair mobility. It doesn't particularly impair anything else. I mean.
I'd be kind of okay with it, but that's just my opinion based on.
There's no obvious reason why it wouldn't.
Yeah, that's just it. There's no reason why it couldn't work.
So you say it would be possible, and would they be able to develop technology?
So technology would be can you actually build things?
Right.
Right? Because you'd be perfectly smart and clever. I mean, dolphins are perfectly smart and clever, but they're not making ships.
No fire.
Or
no fire, it's true.
Yeah.
Fire would be a lot harder.
And so the ability to manipulate your environment is going to be a big one. You can still be sentient and not do that.
Right.
So, like that could work.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Admiral Akbar's world is entirely underwater and his species evolved that way. They show it.
Oh.
On the show. Clone Wars.
On Clone Wars.
Yeah. Okay. That brings me a whole new level of why is it dying in the ship bridge. Okay.
How'd you guess? I have a couple of tricky Star Trek creatures that defy logic. You may take your pick or handle both. The silver goo from Voyager that is able to mimic the entire crew.
Oh, that looked at the demon planet, right?
And the prophets.
What's
From
it?
DS9.
Prophets? Yeah, that's so like the nice thing about Star Trek is it rarely invokes magic, but like there's two places it does. One is Q and the other is the prophets. But even then, even when they invoke the prophets, they tend to say, well, but we would look like we were super if we were talking to an amoeba or something. Not an amoeba, but if we were talking to something much simpler. Yeah, the prophets are very hard with that whole like stepping out of space-time thing. Like I don't think there's any easy way to explain them at all.
Yeah.
The silver blood, that's an interesting one. So just for reference for those of you who haven't seen it, this is in 2 episodes of Voyager. They live on this thing called a demon planet where the temperature is something like 400 or 500 Celsius. And anything that they touch, they immediately take the form of. Now, some of the way they did that was terrible. Like, for example, like there was a scene, I can't remember who, one of the crew members touched it and it made like, I think it was Milana touched it and it made like her finger because she touched it with her finger. It's like, wait, what? How did it do that? It was somehow like taking the DNA and thinking that like there was specific finger-specific DNA there. It was making...
Oh, you didn't show me that.
No, I didn't show you that.
You cheated.
That's not very feasible. I mean, there's obviously genetic things, so things which can copy the color of something it appears and things like that. But that full mimicry, and especially like taking on body parts, and then the way that I think something happened where they actually started breaking down in a later episode. There was another episode where they were like going someplace else, and they started breaking down, and you realized it wasn't really the Voyager crew; it was those guys from that previous episode. Yeah, they're both pretty far stretched. Thanks for asking, though. Good question. We'll probably have to just take these two and then stop because it's actually 8 o'clock now. But go ahead.
All right. My question is, when we look at a Vulcan in Star Trek, we see they've got green blood. We see that they sleep less than humans, they eat less than humans.
Yeah.
So
they're strong and tolerate temperatures.
Incredibly strong. So not exactly Superman.
Yeah.
a universe where you've got a yellow or red sun.
Yeah.
So the question is, are Vulcans photosynthesizing? Do they have the ability to produce sunlight, yellow or red, into sugars that their bodies use to supplement ATP? And the question being that if they're able to do this, do we have any sort of facsimile for a creature on Earth that is capable of using photosynthesis to supplement its diet?
I think, like this man, I do. Well, there's certainly a lot of chemosynthetic organisms, right? So there's a lot of things which can change chemicals over. Photosynthetic, we know some, obviously, plants, but also a lot of microbes, like what's it, Chlamydomonas and stuff like that.
I think maybe that's algae. Your euglenids, your some bacteria, or you just go symbiotic.
It's a great question because we don't actually see, so building on what you just said, we don't actually see a whole lot of plant life on Vulcan.
No.
Right?
It's mainly desert.
It's mainly desert. Like everywhere we've seen on that planet, it seems to be desert.
So desert and judgment.
So things I would say against that would be that the Vulcans don't get weaker when clothed.
Well, it's not necessarily that they have to photosynthesize.
Oh, they
supplement. Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
I see.
Ability to. I mean, Spock does eat. And what was it called? Like the plomeek soup or whatever it is.
Yeah, right. Thank you, guys. Add that into the.
Yeah, I like it. Thanks for that.
All right. One last one.
Last one.
So, I know that Star Wars has at least 2 species that are recognizably amphibian, probably more like 5 or 6 or 300. However, both the coral and the calamari are both from an aquatic world, and yet they can still breathe air. I haven't seen anything from that from an aquatic planet in Star Trek. Is there an aquatic species? And does Star Wars have an actual water-only species?
I think there was in the animated series. I'm trying to think if there was one. Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot the aquatics in the exactly. So the Zindia are a bizarre one. I guess I wonder if this is pro Star Trek. The Zindia are bizarre, but there was the aquatic race, the Zindia. Yeah,
So
exactly.
you
But
have
I think
to
also
appeal-
there was one in the animated series as well, if I remember correctly too. But yeah, it's definitely not very common. 'Cause I mean, there's 700 episodes of the non-animated Star Trek ones, and we're able to come up with 2.
And as for Star Trek, or not Star Trek, as for Star Wars, is there an actual water-only species in your knowledge?
In the comic minutes.
That just doesn't seem very efficient.
It's always, well, I mean, aside from the giant fish. But like a water-only species, not sentient one.
Comic number 7, that is.
Oh, okay.
Comic number 7. Which is that the one that happened after the first?
On the water planet, stranded on the water planet.
No. I don't know what comic number 7 means.
I don't know the title of the comics, and I know in comic number 7, that's what it's the more recent Marvel one. No, it's like from the 1980s.
Oh man.
Oh, okay. Did you guys?
Expanded universe.
Yeah. So
that's true. We never did specify.
There was an amazing set of Star Wars comic books that came out between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, where it took a wild turn.
Green bunny rabbit.
The Green Bunny Rabbit was amazing. Right? It was wow, I was so disappointed when Empire Strikes Back came because I had seen it in the comics. All right, so we have to evacuate.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you being here.